Welcome to the ESI Africa studio. Today I am speaking with Jonathan First, who is the lead specialist at the Product Innovation Unit at DBSA. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you very much.
Jonathan, we're going to be talking about the advantages of blended finance and also a little bit on global trends in the finance sector, and looking at the finance challenges that are keeping the utility market awake at night, but also not only the project developers but government-led programs. So my first question is around why does this continue to be the case? Why are we still worried about finance when we have so many excellent projects that are on the go?
Well, I think initially I'd like to talk about blended finance. So what is blended finance? So I think it's very important to define that up front. So blended finance is the combination of concessional finance, which is provided by governments, often through development finance institutions, and in combining it with private sector funding. Now, it is well known that there is an enormous shortfall in infrastructure development, particularly in Africa. And if Africa is to meet its needs, and particularly in terms of what's called the UN Sustainable Development Goals, blended finance is going to have to play a much more meaningful role, in the sense that we need to crowd in or catalyze far more funding from the private sector. So just to put this in perspective, they predict that in 2020, funds under management, so that's funds in the pension funds and the life companies, will exceed $1.2 trillion.
This is worldwide.
Sorry? No, just within Africa. Okay? Worldwide, it's $111 trillion. Now, almost none of that is currently being used to fund infrastructure. So the challenge is, how do you access that $1.2 trillion for infrastructure development on the African continent? And the only way it can be done is through blended finance. In other words, combining concessional finance, which typically takes the higher risk part of the funding structure, and combining it or crowding in the private sector. So I think it's very important to understand blended finance in that context. There's another recognition, and this is worldwide, that only by way of going the blended finance route will we get anywhere close to meeting the infrastructure requirements for Africa. So that's the sort of context of blended finance.
Would you call it the PPP model of finance?
It's not necessarily, no, it doesn't have to, it can support PPP, but it can support government-led programs as well. It's not necessarily restricted to PPP. It's more crowding in or accessing all this pension or long-term funding from the pension or the life companies. So just in the South African context, there is over 3.2 trillion rand in the asset management, or managed by asset managers, and a fraction of that is invested in infrastructure. So how do we get that money into infrastructure on a sustainable basis? So that's very much...
Sorry, why do you feel that it's the case that we have all this money that is available, but it's not being pushed out to the infrastructure development? What are the challenges there?
Okay, so there's two factors. The one is that people who contribute to their pension funds and life companies, they have to change the mandates of the asset managers in such a way to commit to provide funding for infrastructure. Now it's happening in a meaningful way in Europe, particularly around green bonds, where the mandates within the pension companies have changed. So pensioners or people contributing to pensions are saying we want more money invested in climate-related investments, for example. So there has to be a change of mindset in South Africa. I think that the asset managers can change people's mindsets. Okay? So that's on the one hand. The one hand is that there has to be a need or a commitment to put money into, let's say, infrastructure, and particularly infrastructure around climate. On the other hand, the government has to create the enabling environment. Not South African government, just any government has to create the enabling environment which allows for pension fund or life company money to be invested in infrastructure in a meaningful way. And this is around a lot of issues. This is around the regulatory environment, it's political stability, it's around democracy as a process. So Those are the two things that have to happen. There has to be the enabling environment in place to support this.
And it's a good starting point.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's what I call the political will. If the political will is not there from the government to create the enabling environment, we're not going to see large amounts of private sector money from the pension or from the life companies.
Well, let's hope that it does happen sometime soon.
Well,
thank you so much, Jonathan.
Is that it?
Thank you for watching. I'm Nicolette Pomba van Zyl, coming to you from the ESI Africa studio. Thank you for watching.